Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the kickoff meeting of our working group. Doesn't really feel like a kickoff because we've been going on for quite some time. We had 3 BOF sessions before we decided to submit our case statement for this working group, which we did shortly actually after the last plenary in Costa Rica. Now we got approved, now we are ready to start, which is exciting. My name is Andreas Rauber. I have no other role than to moderate, basically, because all the content is coming from the real experts. What I'll do is very briefly, for those of you who has been at any of the BOF sessions before? 1, 2, 3, so quite a crowd, yeah. So I'll try to recap briefly what has been going on and what we are trying to achieve, so give you kind of a bit of the mission for this working group, before then jumping into what we are trying to achieve. So basically the setting that we started off with more than 3, almost 3 years ago was there's many TREs out there. They're basically all very, very similar, but not identical. There's different design decisions taken when both in the technical setup, but also in the processes, matching the setup, the number of users they have to serve, matching the types of data they're dealing with, the sensitivity and all of that. And we were trying to get an understanding of why have certain design decisions been taken? Why is a process model this way in one TRE and differently in another? Which controls have been put in place to increase the security? And if you add that control, what kind of limitations does it incur in terms of usability or flexibility? So trying to understand where those subtle differences are. The problem with TREs are, we are infrastructure, we don't publish papers. If you want to find out anything about the most nitty-gritty details about any deep neural network, you'll find 50 or 100 papers each year that describe the precise shape of any function in there. But finding out details about how those TREs are operated is almost impossible. There's very, very few papers published because we operate the infrastructures. We don't go around shouting and writing PDF files. So we tried to gather a group of people and said, okay, let's discuss this in-house, let's share our stories, and you will see one of the activities, for example, that we are trying to get at is sharing stories about things that almost went wrong. Now, nobody writes a paper that we almost had that, whatever, breach, failure stuff. But it's much easier in a kind of trusted environment that we are having in here to say, okay, I know of a colleague who had observed that one, no matter how far away that is from the own theory, because that's, I guess, where we can learn and improve best and move towards better collaboration, better interoperability, setting up joint infrastructures. So that's basically the things that we want to do. We want to be ready for discussing things such like you want to do work on sensitive data together, so you have to bring together the data in some place. Can we set up on demand a TRE that we jointly operate for a specific project, an instant TRE that we then dissolve afterwards again? Or how do we accommodate federated learning across different instances? Not coming up with a standard that we want to implement, but understanding what could be done to make that easier to set up. So that's basically the goals. And so what we have what we were discussing in the previous setting, and we came up with 3 problem spaces that we want to address, and that's something that we're gonna share with you today, and then see how we take it from there. So the goals that we want to really address is infrastructure providers, those groups that are operating the TREs. So we understand where the commonalities are, where the differences are. Oh. I see my slides moving on here. You don't see the slides moving here. What do I have to do to get those slides here? The state of the slides that I see here being projected there? Do I need to switch the display somewhere? I mean, I guess, but I thought it was set up. Just not to ruin it, because otherwise it might link up to, because there will be people online and I don't want to. Okay. 1 second. Okay, so basically what we do is we'll address, we had identified 4 problem spaces that we wanted to address. 3 of them then made it into the case statement just because we want to have something that is achievable within 18 months. 18 months is not a lot of time. So we're not going to have, yes. So that's That's a picture actually from the first BOF session. Was it in Gothenburg? When we first got together and we asked for a room for about 40 to 50 people. And the room was packed and the foyer behind it was packed. We had more than 70 people signing the Google Docs, and that was probably 2/3 of the people in there. So we were really positively motivated by that crowd, and we hope we can keep that spirit going. So we are trying to address infrastructure providers, helping us to operate, to share, and understand where the differences are, where mistakes happen, where risks are, understanding the risk profiles, and see how we can better collaborate across TREs potentially. Helping data stewards who have to curate the data in the TREs. There is quite a bit of debate about open science with closed data, because open science doesn't mean that the data has to be free, but it's still proper science, transparent science, and how we can do that, and what kind of information, what kind of metadata can we actually communicate without leaking too much information. So there's quite some interesting debate on that level. How can we achieve fairness for sensitive data? And the researchers ultimately to actually find and make it easier for them to use TREs, because it's like with HPC environments, so high-performance computing environments, there is a group of users who is very familiar with working in such an environment, who have been using that for years and are accustomed to the kind of data access regulations that you have. And there's other communities, especially if you're increasingly working interdisciplinary, who have never worked within a TRE environment, and for whom the whole thing is a miracle, so to speak, bit of magic. And if there is something we don't want in science, it's magic. So lowering the barriers for using those, and see how we can help them perform efficient research in TREs. So that's basically the value proposition that we are trying to achieve, addressing those three customer audiences. And anybody else who finds it beneficial, of course, is welcome again as well. I'll now hand over to start discussing the three task areas that we will be addressing in the working group, and put that up for discussion and comment for each of those, and see where you would be interested in seeing either things that you would like to learn from the results of this workroom, so making it a success for all of us who are in this room, and also maybe raising questions that we currently don't have on the work program that can be added easily without having the scope explode, because we won't save the world. That's the scope. Does it make sense? Does it meet your expectations? I see nobody leaving the room immediately, so I hope it was worthwhile getting up that early. Martin, may I hand over to you for introducing the first problem space?
Hi, I'm Martin. I will be the task lead, group lead of the first problem area that we want to do about blueprints. And as Andy already said, the theories are very similar in what they're doing in operating, but they're not really identical. They have different flavors. They have different implementations of the same concept, different terms for the same concept. And so far as we know, there's no really community-agreed technical blueprint, no community-agreed terminology for these concepts, these processes of operating this theory, of getting data in, getting data out, checking output of this data, and the building blocks that make this theory or a theory. So this leads usually to more complex problems for people wanting to start a theory, but even among theory providers, this lack of common concepts, lack of terminology, makes it more complex to talk about problems, to talk about our near misses, talk about the not so nice things that will never get published anywhere. Also, it makes a problem of those infrastructures to compare them, how to improve certain components if you cannot really pinpoint it. And generally the lack of understanding, or more complex lack of understanding. To to then leading to very suboptimal design choices. It's all about language, it's all about understanding what we're doing. And if we cannot understand what anybody else is doing, how can we improve our own theory, our own infrastructure? We also thought about how to model threats to these theories. We are not really in this model of there's an evil hacker that wants to exfiltrate data and then sell it on the black market. That's, I don't know how about you, but they don't pay enough so I can live my life in some island selling this data. So I need to work with a different threat model, maybe a researcher that's, I don't know, again, about you, but maybe there's some sloppy research ongoing, there's a deadline I need to not miss, and then I maybe not work as correct as I should, and maybe data gets leaked accidentally. And that's more in this context where we're operating or making a threat model. For example, we came up with some initial threat model. It's for sure not complete. We have still time until our final recommendation on modeling those threats. The same way we made an early preliminary survey on what theories are actually out there. It's for sure not a systematic literature review. That was not the point. It was just, okay, what is even out there? Let's start with reasonable effort. What theories are there? What they do? In which field do they operate? Are there statistical office? Are there not a statistical office? But what's the level of access? Is there anonymized data available? Is it pseudonymized? Is it still sensitive available? Hopefully not. And just look at how much data theories provide. This is a chart on the data sets they provide. And not every theory provides a data set. Some of them are just for computing. Some are just for executing stuff. They don't at all provide data, but some of them do. Yeah, and I forgot the most important part, the yellow box. As you can see, Australia is not very prominent. I'm pretty sure there's more than we found. So if you know a theory, if you work in a theory, make yourself known, or if you're shy, scan the QR code, please, and type the name of your theory inside. If you want to be contacted, type in your contact information. It would really help us. Or yeah, you can just leave discreetly your business card here. We can contact you this way. It would be really nice. Yeah, same way with the blueprints. We also found other groups, other endeavors that model these technical blueprints. The SRE, the Standardized Architecture for Trusted Research Environments. Excellent publication based on the 5 safes. This is on the left side, the 5 safes model. I think most people who are sitting in this room know about the 5 safes. If you don't, then please look it up. It's a very important concept. This is the type of concepts we talk about, where everybody has kind of the same understanding of important components, of important terminology, and then we can talk about the more nitty-gritty stuff, the more technical details, but this is a model that enables people to talk about those problems. Recently, I also saw it here yesterday, this semi-automated checking of outputs, really interesting concept. We also need to look more into that. I wanted to take it to the slides to give it a bit more exposure. Really interesting. Based on these 5 safes, we already made again a draft technical blueprint about processes, our own, that were before the SRE model, where we just modeled, okay, how do we actually get data into this theory system? How do we get access data in this system? Who is involved and in which order? And what is required step by step? How to safely get data inside? How to get it into the secure data store? And what is necessary to, what processes are necessary to work in this environment, these safe processes, we call them. The work plan for this subgroup is we want to investigate how these theories are operated, identify the commonalities of the different theories. If you scanned the code before, it's a very long list. It could be longer, but it's still long. And we want to develop a guidance on these best practices of setting up a theory, of design decisions that influence this. We don't want to make another standard, but just to give an introduction kind of into this topic. And the graphic would be our outcomes. I'm standing too close. The outcomes from the work statement that we submitted. So please look it up. And yeah, I give the floor. Who gives the floor to? Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Martin. So I'm from QSIF. We're a not-for-profit here in Australia. We provide, if we, given time is short, we're basically a research support and enablement organisation that works in the digital space. So that's both skills, people, infrastructure. So that's essentially QSIF in a nutshell. I won't go into the history, but we built our own TRE because we looked at what was available in the market at the time and it didn't meet all of our needs, so we built our own. So as you can see here, it's the usual kind of setup, secure access from remote access, and once you get that access, everything is restricted. So once you're on a virtual desktop, you can't do anything outside of that virtual environment without going through a moderated gateway. So you can't bring anything in or out without going through moderation. We pre-install software. You can have commercial software put into the environment. Of course, that comes at a cost, so we pass that cost back. As a not-for-profit, we try to run the platform at essentially cost recovery. So we're not there to make a big profit. And you can request stuff to be installed into the environment. So you can't do that yourself, we have to do it for you. I think one of the big things, and I'll highlight this on the next slide, is that it's data custodian governed. So once we've set the environment up and brought the initial person in, we hand over the keys. So we don't get in, we don't access the data, we don't look at the data, we don't control who can do what. That's a self-governed process within the environment. And of course, we can spec the VDIs to suit however you would like.
Sorry, can you move the mic a bit?
Okay, is that better? Yep, okay. So one of the key things that we've done here is around scalable governance, and I just touched on that a moment ago. So you can see from, no mouse showing? Okay. You can see in the top left, we've got our data owner or data custodian. In our use case, we're largely dealing with research institutions. So there's normally a data sharing agreement between the owner and the custodian and the institution, and that's done through a data steward. So that data steward is acting as the representative of that institution to enact that data sharing agreement. In our case, they then do their due diligence internally to make sure that any data that they're going to use within our environment is appropriate and approved. And at that point, we stand up the vault, which is the grey box. We then have a multi-step invitation process where they nominate a vault steward. The vault steward can be the data steward, or it can be a delegate, or it can even be the data owner. We then go through an invitation process. That invitation process involves generating an invitation to a particular identity. They then do some training. Once they've completed the training successfully, we authorize them for key point. They then accept the invitation. There's a validation step where the person who sent the invitation checks that the person who accepted the invitation is the same person, and then approves that. And at that point, they get access into the environment. In our case here, the vault steward then invites those delegates, and you can see those delegates below. There's ingress reviewers, egress reviewers, and vault managers. All three of those roles have access to virtual desktops, but the vault manager is the workhorse role within the vault. So the vault manager is the person who ingresses in the data sets, creates those data sets, creates research activities, connects data sets to research activities or disconnects them as necessary in accordance with the data sharing agreement. So they follow the rules. They then use that same invitation process that's been used for the Vault Steward and for the delegates to bring in researchers specific into research activities. Once all of that's happened and researchers get onto a desktop, they will only see the data that's been connected to their research activity. So you can be in a Vault and be in multiple research activities. Each virtual desktop is tied to a persona. So as you navigate through the interface, it works out what role you're fitting and in what research space. So it's controlled. So you can't get into the environment and go, well, I'm in 4 research activities. I can get onto the desktop and see data from all 4. So that's done to prevent data leakage across those roles. So it's locked down. Those data sets are read-only. So your exemplar data set remains pristine. They can make copies of that, but they can't get anything out unless it goes through the egress process. One of the other things we've done is that ingress and egress is managed inside the environment. So some of the other environments, people will send their data to a moderator team who then checks the data and then they put it into the environment. In our case, that moderation is happening inside the environment. So the egress and ingress reviewers actually review on one of our virtual desktops in read-only mode. It also means they get access to the same tools as the researcher. So if there's R scripts or those sorts of things, they can run them and see what they do to make sure that they meet the governance rules that have been set for the Vault. This means that that process is happening entirely within the secure environment and there's reduced potential for data leakage. I think one of the other things that's a little different for us is that we were aware that for many research groups, those teams are quite small. So one person can hold multiple roles within the Vault. And if I was to give you a demo, if you come by our booth, I can give you a demo. I hold all the roles in our demo Vault, right? So I can do everything, and it's done for that reason. We do provide warnings. So if you try to add someone into a role that's conflicting, it will throw up a warning, but it won't stop you. And it's to accommodate those really small teams. So from a system architecture perspective, this is kind of more like the physical layer. We've built Keypoint on top of the Nectar Research Cloud. So the Australian Research Data Commons here runs the Nectar Research Cloud, and currently we run the Queensland node. We've built on top of that. And within that, we've built what's called a restricted region. And effectively what that means is that only administrators that we allow to see the infrastructure can see the infrastructure, rather than the entire cohort of administrators across the country, which is how it works for most of Nectar Research Cloud. So it's a fairly simple infrastructure. I think one of the key things here that we've done is that we've connected our authentication to the Australian Access Federation, which is a federated login service across all of the research institutions in Australia. So it means that when you log into the environment, it actually sends you off to your institution. You authenticate using your institutional credentials, and then that comes back to us. We check those credentials, and then we run our own MFA challenge. All right, so not all institutions will enforce an MFA challenge on every login. Some of them will let you bypass that for a period of 30 days or 90 days. And we didn't feel that was secure enough, so we've instituted our own MFA on top of whatever your institution provides. The reason we've used AAF is that some institutions require analysis of research software to be done using your institutional credentials. So rather than mint our own credentials, we get you to use your institutional credentials. Having said that, if you're not part of an Australian institution and you're being granted access into the environment, we can mint virtual home, so virtual home within AAF credentials, which means we can mint credentials outside of an institution and allow you in that way after a validation process to ensure that you're appropriate. So from a more technical perspective, I like to describe our system as an event-driven state machine. Effectively, this is an choreographed Saga microservices design. So the idea being that everything is decoupled. And so within each vault, it has its own control, and you'll see that on the next slide. So we have common services outside in our main control plane, and then within the environment, each vault is essentially a little self-contained ecosystem that runs its own functionality. One of the key things here is every event within the system is logged into an audit system, so we're able to go back afterwards and have a look at what's been done within the environment by who. And so we're tracking all those personas, and those personas are basically connected back to your real identity, your AAF identity in this case, so we know who you are. And it means that if something happens that we need to investigate, we can go back and recreate your actions within the environment. There's a slide that I had that's gone missing. That's okay. So I had quite a technical slide there that goes through how we've set this up on our environment and showing the different control planes and separation of concerns and what sort of machines are there. But that slide's not there, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
That's basically an example of what we want to try to do within this working group, is to compare such different TRE setups, processes, technical setups, not to standardize them, but to understand where the differences are. Who in the audience is actually running or working at an TRE infrastructure? How many operators do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so a few of them. So what we were very interested is in this working group, in one of the follow-up meetings, virtual online meetings, to get similar descriptions of your processes as far as you are allowed and willing to share them, of technical setup processes, and then share them, standardize them, and map them, and try to understand what kind of controls did you do and why did you introduce them, and would that be interesting to add to our TRE as well, to get whatever additional security or not missing a specific risk point like that. Do you want to briefly talk about the federation aspect of that? Because that, I guess, also shows us kind of slightly different perspective of how we can connect TREs, and again, that would be something we would be interested in taking a look at.
Thank you very much. So I'm Phil Quinlan, Professor of Digital Engineering, Health Informatics, University of Nottingham. Great to be here. Some of the things I'm going to talk about, we also spoke about yesterday. So I've found on the app, you can go back and watch the session. So if you did miss it, it's the highs and lows of Federation. So go and take a look. There's lots of cool speakers yesterday as well. So federated research is something that we've been trying to promote in terms of not just talking about federation from a technical aspect, but a much wider aspect in terms of all the other things that you need to care about when you're trying to do federation. And in many ways, it is a bit of a blueprint as well. If you have a look at the QR code, because we are trying to gather some feedback on aspects around things like trust and how integrated we think TREs should be and those types of topics. So if you want to help us understand where we should be going, scan the QR code and it will just take you through a few questions. So aside from all the technical challenges that are out there, there's also lots of pressures on TREs, to be federated. We want you all to be working together, but then you all should be fair. You should all have 5 safes. You should be compliant with SACRA, which is the specification around how to be a TRE. You should start installing these tools called SACRA and SACRA ML that are coming out of the UK around semi-automated disclosure control checks. You should have OMOP. You should have, so these demands and demands and demands are coming, both to be more integrated, more connected, but also these principles that are out there that are constantly brought in to how we should be doing federation, but also these other principles coming along. And so we've been talking about patterns, so how do we group these things together? And we've got 2 that we're working on currently. So tomorrow there's a session at UQ where we're going to talk a little bit more about this as well. And what we're trying to say is we've got to have a way of grouping functionality together. So this one on the left is 5 safes, TES, so Task Execution Service. It's talking about how do you do 5 safes and bring in GA for GH standards. What is it you need? What are the functionality components that you need? How do you bring this all together? Not telling people this is how you build it and this is exactly the software you need, but what do you have to, as in you have to install that software or not. But these are the core functional components that you need in order to enable to be part of adopting TES and also doing that in a way that's 5 safes compliant. And the other one we've got working on at the moment is around discovery. So that's that initial question and answer type of approach of how many patients do you have, if it's a health example, or how many people in the population do you have that have these characteristics? And understanding how you bring that query in, how you would answer it, and how you would come back. So that's 2 of the weaves that we're currently working on. At the bottom there's a link to our documentation, so docs.federated-analytics.ac.uk. There you'll see all the documentation as it develops. So at the moment, you'll just see the 5 safes TES, and all the other documentation is also going on there as well. If you do want to get more involved in this type of work, we're still trying to understand what are all the components that we need to have in play. And everything we do is in the open. It'll be up, it's via the GitHub web pages as well. So you'll see it straight away as soon as we do it, it'll be out there, and we really are looking for collaborations to come through as well. And that was it on that one.
Thank you. Yep. I guess we'll keep you here right away because that is the direct lead over. Are there any questions? Sorry, I'm rushing through. Anything that we should address right away before moving into the discussion anyway on the work activities? Good. Because that leads over to the second subgroup where we move from blueprints, and with the Federation you've already started addressing that, is how can we become more interoperable across TREs? And that can be from some very specific technical aspects on the API level to the organizational aspects you were mentioning. And that's coordinated by Rob, but since Rob is not here and he's, I hope, sleeping at this time of the night, I'm happy that you can jump in for him.
Yeah, no, for sure. I am unfortunately a very poor substitute for Rob. He's way more knowledgeable. He's also got a really nice, smooth Scottish accent, unfortunately, rather than my English one. So this sort of sounded much better, even if it's the same words, but I'll give it a go. Yeah, so interoperability, these are Rob's slides. I'm just going to talk you through them from my perspective, I think, of what Rob was trying to say. So obviously in different types of interoperability, there are some aspects that are much easier to undertake than others. And this came up in our session yesterday then about data standards, standardization of data, standardization of infrastructure. Also in an international context, the standardization or lack of standardization around language. And so how do you become interoperable if you're using just very different data standards, very different data structures? That's a real challenge in the area that we're in. And really what we've been trying to do, and this is, I mean, I'm very connected to the work with DARE UK, which is where Rob sits within Health Data Research UK. And actually some of the harder challenges out there are around the trust and the legal aspects. So when you have a single TRE, it's much easier to understand the boundaries of those responsibilities. As Peter was describing, you have a TRE, they have a role, a researcher comes in and somebody says yes or no, and that's all contained within one. If you're doing a project that involves multiple TREs, well, who takes responsibility? Who says yes or no? Is it both? Is it one? And so there is the operational aspect, there's a technical interoperability, but there's also the interoperability around the actual operations of the TRE. And in particular, understanding if you've got your own TRE, you control all those boundaries and you have confidence in those boundaries that you've put in play. You've now got 2 TREs. So someone was mentioning earlier about the threat kind of detection. Do you trust that other TRE? Because you're now connected. What if somebody actually has a challenge over there? So how do you accredit TREs? How do you actually understand? Are we working to similar standards to make it safe to actually link our 2 TREs together? So if you did follow the QR code, you would see some questions on these types of things. So we're trying to understand where the boundaries are for TREs. And we're trying to do that from 2 perspectives. One is from a TRE's point of view, where are you comfortable? Where are you today? Where do you think you could get to? And where do you think is somewhere that is just never going to happen because actually that's too hard? So when we talk about interoperability and federation, we're not just talking about the tech, but as TREs, where do you want to be? Where do you think that safety aspect comes in? How integrated do you want to be? And so these are some of the things that we were putting out there. And that's what the survey is trying to understand as well, is to understand where's the community at in some of these aspects. And so if we have a very loose association between TREs, and what we mean by that is fundamentally they retain complete ownership of what they're doing, they have complete autonomy, but autonomy in itself can drive silos. So if they retain complete control and there's no integration and there's no crosstalk between the TREs, what that means is it really restricts what you can do from a federation point of view. It's a much looser type of federation, but then that makes it much harder for a researcher to do the research that they want to undertake. So we've got to understand this balance between what the researchers want and also what the TREs are actually comfortable in providing. Also, on the autonomy side, it's understanding how much autonomy do you want and how much are you prepared to release slightly to make it easier to do collaboration. What are the things that you absolutely want to control yourself and it's non-negotiable, but what could you do as a collective? So collectively actually agree the autonomy. So you work as a federated infrastructure rather than single isolated ones. So if you think about how a federated project would work today, most researchers will have to have individual agreements with each TRE. They would log into each one individually, and they'll go and do their research, and then they'll pull that analysis out and try and do some sort of meta-analysis. So that's what happens internationally. It's also what happened, for example, in the UK around COVID. We've got national TREs. We've got a TRE in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England. They went into each one individually, did that work, then pulled out the results, and then did some sort of meta-analysis over the top. But actually, are there different ways of bringing those TREs together? Can we integrate them into a mesh? And so this is definitely much more in Rob's world, where he understands this much more than I do around how we might be able to integrate these TREs. But we might be able to change the dynamic of what we can do between TREs if we can provide the secure infrastructure to link them together. So again, this isn't saying you have to do it only this way, but can we bring in a mechanism of bringing those TREs onto the same type of network so that they can at least see each other in a very secured and very private way, but that enables researchers to navigate them in a slightly easier way. We haven't got the answers to this yet. We've got some prototypes being developed under the DARE UK programme, but it's not solved, and it would be really interesting to hear if people have created these networks between TREs from a technical networking perspective. So another piece of work that is trying to understand and give that type of baseline and understanding is my TRE similar to another TRE is something called SATRA. This has been developed from the University of Dundee in Scotland, continuing to be enhanced as well as part of the DARE UK programme. There's a new release that's just come out, and there's a lot of work that's going to be going on now around the federation. So their first step was very much, what does a TRE have to be a TRE? But now there's going to be, well, what does a TRE have to be part of a federal network of TREs? That's work that's ongoing. Again, all their contributions you can see on GitHub. They retain an issue log there if you want to put in suggestions. So I would recommend, if you're interested in understanding how the standards move in, to understand how we can be interoperable from a governance point of view, SATRA is definitely something to have a look at. So just picking up what we're trying to get to, we have this idea of a front door, or I think he refers to it as a lead TRE. So when a researcher wants to do a project involving more than one TRE, the concept is that a single TRE will be that point of contact for that researcher. They will sort out all the networking, the interoperability, the governance, and be the TRE that takes responsibility for that project, and also vouches for the researcher. So they will have the relationship with the researcher, say, we know who they are, we validated them, and we're letting them into this network. And then the aim is to, on a per project basis, so actually for this project, we're integrating TREs 1, 2, 3. But for a different project, it might be integrating TREs 1, 2, and 4. So that dynamic ability to actually link TREs together based on the project that's actually been undertaken, is the big piece of work that we're working on over the next 18 months or so. And that was the last slide.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Any questions towards that federation perspective? Yes, please. Sorry.
Thank you. So thanks, great presentations, really interesting information. I'm wondering if you can share your perspective on the size of the network. So are there optimal interactions for TREs? Are there too many? What does that look like?
Yeah, don't have an answer. As in how many TREs. So we have, I mean, if you look at, there's a graph actually from Dare UK where you just see the currently explosion of TREs and lots of TREs because of the policy aspect has really driven to say we want TREs and therefore everybody's got a TRE. And that's partly why SATRA is really important because there's lots of people that say they've got a TRE, but they're not really a TRE. But they know they have to be a TRE, therefore they say what they've got is a TRE. So you kind of get caught in this loop. It's a bit like everybody does AI, but nobody does AI at the same time. So there's definitely a challenge there. And what we're trying to explore, though, is that not every TRE has to take on the responsibility of the federated project. So locally in Nottingham, we don't have a big history of running a TRE, but we want to be connected and we want our data to be secure. So we might create more of a secure data environment which connects to a TRE that wants to provide the federation. So we don't all need to be the people that validate the researchers and do all the governance and all that sort of stuff. Scaling up, we also see a difference between kind of internal and external federations. So between countries to countries, you probably wouldn't want that to happen on an end-to-end basis versus having a couple maybe in each country which can operate as the national node that would then do that kind of bilateral agreement with another national node. So they would sort the internal federation, and then there'd be less kind of federation when it comes to it. So in general, the more you can put data in one place, the better for researchers. So you don't want to just promote endless federation. So but at times you do need it. So finding that balance is really hard.
I don't know if it's part of you can answer this question, but anyway, a TRE is fantastic, so I can have my data secure there and trust it. But if I have the data I wanted to put there so researchers can go and analyze. So the different TRE will have a different set of tools and analysis software. So how does align to how good can be a matching where I can put the data there and depending of the data, so are we going to build TRE just based on the data so you can connect those tools?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. That's why we've been looking at the JF4JH standards. One called TES, which is a task execution service, and that abstracts away. So you give it the environment you need to run. So if your code is R, you give it the environment. So when it goes into the TRE, R will run. But that's a very different way of a TRE thinking, where historically you'd get the virtual machine with the tools already pre-installed. And what we're saying is actually to do federation, for exactly the scenario you described, we need a way of bringing the tools in for that particular project on demand for that. But that's some of the things we're working on currently. Well, how do you do that? How do you know it's safe? How do you validate it? So big challenge, but adopting the standards that are already there are really important.
Thank you so much. My name is Amy Nürnberger. I'm at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I was curious as to how you see this type of interoperability and this group overall interacting with standards and frameworks like those that are offered by the Global Open Research Commons.
I don't know is the answer. I will pass that one to Rob, or does anybody else from the working group have a...
Not an answer yet, but no. I guess what we will see, and this, since you mentioned before, there's a flood of new TREs emerging everywhere. I think we'll see a much more drastic increase, and that connects to this open research environment, because so far, most of the TREs that we have been in contact with work with sensitive data, so medical sciences, social sciences, and what we added in the very early days when we were discussing the shaping of the working group, we said sensitive and confidential data, because there's a flood of data out there that we need for open science. Machine data, machine operations data, predictive maintenance data, quality assurance processes, so basically any industry collaboration that is useful and extremely valuable for research, for testing, and whatever AI readiness, since you mentioned everybody's doing AI, where we need exactly the same safeguards as we do for sensitive data. Sometimes at least the financial risks are even much higher than with traditional sensitive data. And so seeing how we can get federations running across universities working with industry partners that have confidential data, connecting confidential data across industries that are competitors to each other, where you, by definition, have to avoid any kind of data leakage, will require a bridging between two worlds that are currently very, very separate, the open science and the process behind it. And also this whole fair movement that you had on the slide, or that Rob had on the slide before, was, can we be fair and still hide the data? Which, yes, absolutely. Fairness never states, data has to be freely available, click on download here. But getting this clear and understanding what it means. And that is actually one thing I'm a bit sorry about. When we designed the working group, we had a fourth topic up there that we wanted to address, which is fairness for closed data. What kind of metadata can we share, and what data would be leaked by the metadata? Actually, so what information would be sensitive that we would leak by providing metadata? We would still love to address it. So if there is anybody in this audience here who would like to coordinate, and bring a few people together to come up with some draft suggestions, or with a risk analysis, taking a look at what kind of metadata different TREs are currently sharing, and what risk assessment has been done, and what kind of guidance could we provide there? I'd love to integrate that into the activities of the working group, because luckily we are very flexible. It's not that we sign a deliverable contract with a funding agency. We're not getting paid for what we're doing here, which is sad, because we always like to get paid, but it also gives us a lot of freedom of being more flexible. So having said that, I think this cross-link is something I would find very, very interesting to address. I definitely don't have an answer. You don't have an answer. I'm not sure if anybody has an answer, let us know. There is an answer here. Yes. If it's another it's a comment, because we have another question there, but answer is highly welcome.
So, and on the fair, just on the fair aspect. So, Jonah, we should maybe There's a group in Manchester, so you probably know Carol Goebel, I think it's a name that most people know. But she's connected to our Federated Analytics program in HDR, and their role is all around the fair and how you can do those components. So maybe we can make sure we connect that up.
So a comment to this question, or a new question? Because then I have, in terms of question routing, it's a question, it's a comment I wrote here.
I'm tempted to defer to Masay, but because we work together on some of these things with Carol. Steve McEachran, UK Data Service. The interoperability part that's there, certainly to think about. One of the you talked about trust and trusted, and how that exchange is going to work. There's half this picture is missing, I think, which is the reason those TREs exist is because of the data provision agreements and the arrangements. So they're an instantiation of an agreement between the data provider and the TRE. This is delivering the other half of that. So part of the question here is, does the data provider trust the researcher and trust the TRE and trust the network? Is a key part of this equation. Which gets to the same, you talked about legal and organisational interoperability here. I think one of the really interesting parts of this, accreditation is an instantiation of this could be trusted, and what that might look like here. And then you get, in the UK, you've got, for example, DA accreditation. Here in Australia, you've got ONDC, accreditation and so forth. I would find one of the really interesting parts of this working group is to look at, essentially, at some point, accreditation or something that instantiates trust is really what you're trying to represent here. What does that look like? Because the endpoint here could be, and I kind of reflected on this yesterday, what is a safe setting? in some circumstances, it is that accreditation under a set of things. What are we all doing that kind of reflects that instantiation of that thing is kind of the end point here.
Yeah.
Progressively, we build up our forms of federation based upon those levels of federation that you were talking about there. So I would find that very interesting as a way of coordinating that thinking, which a lot of that is going on. So.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a project going on with University of Swansea at the moment on exactly that topic, because they're both building the federated tools, but then they're going, wait a minute, how does this impact the agreements we've got with the data providers and how comfortable they are? So it completely, yeah, very valid point.
Comment on that?
So my question is linked to what you were saying around that connection between the provider and the researcher at the end, particularly in that front door model that you're presenting. And I was just wondering if you have any thoughts around Indigenous data sovereignty and care principles in that space?
In what regard? Sorry, I don't quite follow.
So the custodians are like 2 steps away in one of the slides that was shown earlier to the vault manager, right? Does the vault manager directly know the data provider? Is there a connection or links of trust in that space? And then here you're going another step further. Those lines of trust, what do they look like? It's exactly the same as what you were asking, but in a specific context.
Yeah, so I don't think we've got the answer to that at the moment. So we're trying to understand how, maybe, Peter, you want to pick up from a TRE's perspective. But you're right, the Federation does take you further away from the origins of the data and the data custodians. And it's understanding what needs to be in play between a front door TRE. So that TRE wouldn't necessarily say yes on behalf of another TRE, but they would say, for example, that is a researcher that we know, and we've validated them, and they've turned up and they've shown a passport, we know they're real, and when they say they're that person, they're that person. So they're kind of that contact point with the individual, because that would be hard to replicate if it was an international project. But it still requires every TRE to say yes to that project, and they've got complete right to say no to that project. They don't have, just because the front door TRE says we think this is a good project, doesn't mean every TRE then has to actually say yes as well. Yeah.
Can I follow up on that a little bit? So the Indigenous Data Network that you saw right in the plenary on day one has been thinking quite a lot about this. I was involved in tangentially with that at some point. And the other side of the RO Crank group, Pete Sefton, has been involved in that work. So there is some work happening here on how you might think about that, but it is not a simple question. How does the community governance work, is part of that problem, and what that interaction might look like. So there is some initial thinking that's there, but instantiating community governance and Indigenous governance is the complexities of just the decision making become really, really complex.
Yeah, and that's where, so on this diagram, that's where we want to get to on the per project basis. So even if the TRE said yes, and some sort of analysis popped in, they can still say no. So at every stage, that TRE their involvement is not dominated by the middle. It is, we never said yes to that. Stop, right? So.
Okay. To follow up a little bit of what you were talking before, and also Steve was talking, but I'm not saying don't have a solution, but just some thoughts about what metadata also needs to be exchanged here, right? And how we provide solutions so that metadata doesn't relieve any of the identification of the sensitive data. So I would think of the types of the levels of metadata. So the one is the minimum discovery metadata, right? It could be based on schema.org or Dicato. So then the access metadata that basically is what Steve was referring to, all which is very important to know what are the agreements that you're going to have to go through, right? So the ODRL or the information from that. But then if you want more detailed metadata to understand, for the researcher to understand better what data we're talking about, if we have either summary statistics or more variable level metadata, what we had done in the past is that is apply differential privacy there at the summary statistics level, and that's what you share. So you have a privacy preserved metadata set. But I know there are challenges with that, but or it doesn't apply to every data set, but that would be one of the options.
I fully agree. So one thing that we were discussing is situations will be very different. It will depend on the type of data, what kind of information you can release, and what we were trying to aim at, and then didn't include anymore, was guidance for what questions you would need to ask in order to decide what information you can release. Sometimes revealing statistics about the data is perfectly fine. If it's machine fault data, you don't want to release statistics on the number of faults, even if it's not the individual, because there it's not the individual data item that's the risky thing. It is exactly the distribution that is the risky thing. So what we wanted to come up with is, here's the set of questions that you would consider in order to decide which metadata to release to which degrees of publicity, because it can be completely public, trusted researchers that are at least entitled to work within the TRE, that have been pre-accredited but not getting access yet, so that they can find out which TREs they would like to combine, and then until the last level where you get accreditation to work with the real data, for example. So that was the kind of mindset. So again, if anybody wants to structure a discussion around that within the working group, very, very interested, and let's just do it. I mean, we are a working group, and there's no single point, we do X, Y, and Z, we'll just integrate it. So, question from your pencil? Okay. And first question. No, you had a question first. And then...
So it's more of a response, actually. So with regards to care principles, it's certainly something that we're looking at. So we're doing co-design with appropriate representatives from the Indigenous community here in Australia. It's really nuanced and tricky, and different groups within the community have different views on how their data should be managed and approached. So we're going through that process now so that we can build appropriate mechanisms into our TRE to honour that design and enact care principles. So we've obviously done 5 safes and fair. Care principles is something that's we're approaching with more caution, because we don't just want to bluster in and put a technical solution in place that doesn't meet the needs of that community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Roger Ward from the ARDC in Australia. I work with a lot of researchers, and I get 2 questions from researchers. First is cost. They're really expensive. So my first question is, how do we contain costs? And if we can't contain costs, how do we put over to researchers that there's a cost of doing business here? These things are inherently expensive. And the second question I get from researchers is performance. There's a lot of unhappiness about the performance. Once they get into a TRE, it's very slow. So how do you ensure that you can scale the infrastructure? Have you got any thoughts about on-premise, using cloud solutions? So they're my 2 questions, containing cost and performance.
Cost is, I'm not solving that one. That's, how do you fund research infrastructures in the world? Question, no answer. But it is expensive. I think that's one of the challenges. And I think it's around communication. But then, if you were a business in that sense, you need to provide what researchers need. And I think that comes more to your second point then about actually having the environment where they don't feel like it's slow. I'm paying for this, but it's, I've spent... And that's probably the main complaint, for example, in the UK. It just takes too long. It will take a year to get the approvals in place, and then blah, blah, blah. So it's not an enjoyable experience. And then you're making me pay for it. It's kind of quite hard. On compute, that's a really interesting one. So I guess there's multiple aspects to that, which do also connect to cost. So we've seen scenarios, for example, where either an academic group or a company have already their own compute. So at University of Nottingham, we have our local high-performance computer. You get charged pennies to use it as a University of Nottingham employee. So why would I pay several thousands or tens of thousands of pounds to use the TRE's compute when I get it for free, almost? And also the same with industry. They have similar scenarios with some cloud providers. For example, when it comes to AI, they've already got the agreement with, say, Google Cloud. You're running this on Azure. I don't want to pay Azure because I've got all the compute I need on over here. And there is some work going on to understand, and this is coming out of the Turing Institute, so it's another DARE UK project, it's aligned to us, about how you might temporarily move the boundary of the TRE to include the compute resource that you need. So for that project, and this is kind of part of this dynamic creation of the setting for a project. So for that project, it's been approved that that compute can be used. And so part of the TRE gets deployed there, the data is there, and so they can use the compute there for that particular project. And we do have this challenge in the UK because we have a lot of data investment programs and compute investment programs that don't necessarily join up between the TREs versus the kind of that compute infrastructure. So it is a challenge. Yeah, some would do on-prem, and that's easier. Others, so the NHS SD program is, I think it's all on cloud. So we've got infinite compute. Do the researchers have the infinite budget to pay for the infinite compute, right? So they are very connected, those two questions. But yeah.
And I think just brief as an answer to that, and then I'll hand over the mic to you, this is again a question that pops up in a lot of places. So, and this is what you have here, how can we integrate the HPC layer that's available somewhere into the TRE? And I know that SURF is doing that in the Netherlands, integrating part of the HPC infrastructure into the National Office of Statistics, into their virtual network and sealing it according to the TRE boundary. So extending the boundary to include part of it. We had exactly the same request from our National Office of Statistics, whether we could integrate part of our HPC environment, either permanently or temporarily under the control. And the question is now, what does it mean to extend the boundary? The VPN, that's the easiest part. So OpenStack, VPN, done. What is the legal boundary? What kind of staff access from the HPC stuff is possible within that boundary? Would they have to administrate the Slurm activities in there? Or is that done by the HPC staff? What kind of vouchers would you need to provide for the HPC staff in order to be allowed to work for another entity then? So, and I guess getting a common understanding of what those risks and decisions are, because we all have encountered those discussions at some point, and some problems are easy to solve, others we ignore or forget. And so sharing that information, I guess, will help us progress there. And this is why we have this, federation interoperability discussions. I guess that's where it will be helpful. On the costs, yeah. I mean, so the cost is always matched to benefits. And what is the cost of not doing it is the other question to be answered. What kind of research can't we do if we don't have the infrastructure? And I guess we've seen settings everywhere from medical sciences, COVID, where not being able to do it costs us more money than investing in for being able to do it. And especially when we are talking industry collaborations, we've had many requests for helping industry analyze their data, but they wouldn't be able to give us the data, and we wouldn't want to have the data on our premises because the risks would be too high. So the need for setting up a TRE in order to enable that kind of analytics and cooperation is part of the business processes as well for that enterprise. And so I think the costs, yes, they are higher than just, but it's like doing anything professionally. Buying a hard disk, so storage is cheap if you buy a single hard disk. Buying storage and managing professionally on a large scale is horrendously expensive, but still we do it because we understand the value of it. So I think that's something that can be argued.
On costs, there is a glib answer to this, which is don't put things in TREs. And I say that quite deliberately, which is say, what is the things that actually need to be in our TRE? And how do you so the way to save costs is only put things in there that actually need to be there. And this feeds into the risk discussion, fundamentally. Do we understand the risks, and do we understand why we're using TREs? And are we putting things in TREs that don't need to be there, and we're not putting it in things that should? So the risk conversation becomes a really good one. And we are actively working on this, to say, what is the profile of the content that you're talking about there? And, are there mechanisms to guiding people to the right place to analyse things? And that goes down to the level of, we're trying to do on the fly, real-time risk evaluation using the disclosure control techniques that are there to go, look, you can have this bit and you have to go through the entirety of the process. You chop these things out, you may be able to still answer your research question and you get it right now. So understanding the access spectrum, understanding the risk profile, and targeting where where you need to be for the 5 safes that you're talking about, and then guide processes for enabling that to occur that's how you address costs. Because I've seen at ANU when I was there, I literally went through and was looking at the cost models of a number of the offerings in here, and there is a fundamental difference between willingness to pay and the cost of operating it. There's a gap there that right now cannot be dealt with. So we have to go, right, how do you target the resources to the places where they really need to be? Which is what I'm really keen to see now we're going into the risk discussion.
Exactly the perfect lead, the perfect lead over to the next slide. Risks, which is the third topic that we're going to address. Is there anything online? No. Okay, perfect. Just not to forget the online audience. The third area is risks. It's coordinated by Ville Tenhunen, who has unfortunately a meeting this week in Europe, which makes it hard for him to be here. So I'll try to summarize his slides. And basically what we want to do is understanding the risks, creating risks profiles, collecting threat models that guide our decision making in order to, and I fully agree with you, deciding what has to be handled by a TRE, where wouldn't we need a TRE, or by reducing some part, taking some stuff out, we could make it whatever, public or in a less, putting it in a less stringent environment. And so understanding better and sharing even just the questions again that we need to ask in order to come to that conclusion. Because the decision ultimately rests with the data owner on where to put it. But what are the guiding questions that one should address, and what are the risks? What are the risks of disclosure? What is the risk and the consequences of having data disclosed? And so what we want to do is a two-folded approach. One is really collecting those questions and the risk, so creating risk profiles. That's one thing. Defining threat models. And for the threat models, in order to support them, because there's lots of threat models that are theoretically, what is the worst thing that could happen? What could possibly go wrong? Which is one approach to doing it. But what we would be very interested, I think it would be very useful to collect what has almost gone wrong or what did go wrong. I mean, what did go wrong is usually makes it to the public, and that's something where you then have incidents reports that we can learn from and that inform our future design and decision making. But it's the near misses that usually are not reported, that are usually not communicated, and that's where I guess the most valuable information is buried. So what we would like to have is an environment, and there is a document out there where we anonymized, would love to collect information and share stories about things almost gone wrong, so that we can actually have that influence our risk assessment processes. And I guess that's something that could happen and could be possible in such an environment, which is not, as a published list of here's the stuff that we nearly missed last year in our operations. That's not something that you put in your annual report. But I think it's the most valuable information to share amongst TREs. And so that would be the question also to this group here. Do you think this can fly? Do you think this could be something that we could do? And not sharing the thing that almost went wrong, but a story about the thing that almost went wrong. Potentially as a hypothetical story, but that's kind of what we want to have, because I think that will help us guide the decision making on where to put data, how can we provide guidance on that? How can we provide guidance on the controls and checks that need to be put in place? Because not all TREs need to be completely locked up and have, auditing every single line of source code that comes in. If a researcher wants to use some R code, do I need to have somebody who goes through the code and make sure that there is no data exfiltration and attack embedded in the neural network training by putting it into whatever the least significant bits of the weights of the gradients? Because that's not a threat scenario that will be applicable in all settings if you want to exfiltrate 50 rows of data. In other settings, you might need to put that in place or do whatever model pruning before you do the egress. So understanding the risks and the according mechanisms will be the goal of the third area of activity. And Ville has set up a document where we want to collect that kind of information. So that's the working group as it stands. The 3 topics that we have officially in the document. The 4th one, if there is interest and somebody willing to chase people up and organize whatever, some online meetings to discuss and collect that information, set up some documents where we combine that. That's the menu for the next 18 months of what we want to cook. Does that resonate? I mean, judging from the discussion that we just had, I think the general sentiment is a yes. Are we missing anything? Is there anything, any immediate feedback on, here's a story I would like to share, or any further discussions in that direction? Yes.
Thank you. I've got a question that I think is along the lines of sort of systems architecture. So looking at some of the diagrams that situate data access agreement or information sharing agreement or data usage agreements and so on, sort of high up, so sort of like the point of origination. So some data custodian or data owner has agreed to make data available for a specific research purpose, and then that agreement delineates roles, responsibilities, conditions for usage, protocols, or you know, different sorts, you know, mechanisms to ensure security that need to be in place and so on. And that's a legal instrument. And it's presumably informed by folks with technical expertise. But I guess my question is, do different models or systems currently used in the context of TRE development or implementation inform what the details then of that legal agreement? Or does the legal agreement sort of sit purely at the level of sort of conceptually, here's what the parties want, and then folks involved in systems architecture need to figure out how to enact the terms of that legal agreement in the context of a technical system? So I guess I'm sort of asking, like, what's the tail and what's the dog and which is wagging which with regard to sort of, you know, like like what populates a legal agreement and what sort of system architecture exists with regard to TREs? I don't know if that's a well-formed question or one that's sort of meaningful for the folks here, but it just occurs to me because, you know, we typically, when we're figuring out what we want to do, we're thinking about what we know is real and what we know is feasible. And so what exists in terms of what's technically feasible tends to inform the agreements we strike legally. And so I'm also thinking a little bit there about the question around Indigenous data sovereignty earlier. And so it's like sort of, you know, we don't dream beyond what we know we can do typically, and to what extent is the one informing the other? Yeah, thank you.
No, that's a perfectly valid question, because ultimately I think it leads over, if we are thinking now in terms of blueprints, to the process blueprints that we were discussing. So what is the process for getting access to something? And of course, different TREs will have different processes in place, and here's where we want to understand commonality. So one of the process models that we have is where the request, so the researcher requests, comes up with a certain data access request for a specific question, and it's the question and the data access in combination. That has to go to the data custodian or owner, and they have to approve each one individually. So that's for some settings the default process, because even if you have access to the data, you're only allowed to use it to answer the specific question that you post. If you find some other coincidental information, you're not allowed to use it without additional approval again of the data owner. And this is one setting. There might be other settings where that is too fine granular, so where a custodian grants access for a family of problems, so to be used within that network for that type of research. And then it's maybe the TRE or a custodian at the TRE who can take that decision on behalf. And so understanding the differences between exactly those process models. So when do we need to model a specific process according to a specific legal agreement, and how many different processes will we have within our TREs for whatever, 3, 4, 5 different types of standard agreements, is exactly one of the things that I think advice would be beneficial, because then you have 5 blueprints. He said, that's the one that's most suitable for that type of legal agreement. And so, yes, absolutely in scope and in line. And I hope we will get some, from sharing stories from different theories, what kind of processes do you have in place? What kind of standard legal agreements, which always have to be minted to the local legal system, but the core building blocks of it, what do they entail on a technical level? I think that would be extremely useful to collect and have, yeah.
Yeah, it made me think that I don't know whether it needs to be another group or it's part of every subgroup, but a set of use cases that can illustrate the challenges, whether are the risk or the interoperability or just the blueprint, the architecture would be maybe very useful to associate with that. So like the collection of use cases. And I don't know if that deserves, again, a separate group.
No, I think we need to work based on use cases in each of those three settings. Use case for specific theories. We will most likely not have real use cases because, again, if you want to discuss them and dissect them, you will likely have to abstract from a specific setting because it's sensitive data and you don't want to reveal the internal operations of a specific, architecture, for example, not to open attack vectors in some cases. But yeah, it will all be based on use cases, I think, on concrete theory implementations from which we abstract the architecture, concrete processes that we then try to abstract to the standard roles as you have them in your system definition, as I guess all theories have them to some degree. See which roles do exist. And same for the risk models, yeah.
Not only the use cases based on the characteristics of the theory, but also the data, because sometimes it might be very large data sets that will be harder to move. Other times, well, just different characteristics.
Yeah, absolutely. Further comments? Anybody has a theory story to share? You don't have stories.
No stories. Just on the use case thing. So one of the things that we're doing in relation to the weaves that we're describing was not necessarily the use case, but the type of analysis that's desired to be supported. So if you're going to do this type of analysis, this is the agreement that you need. So grouping, I guess, use cases by that, because that'll then help describe, what agreements would you need, what data needs to move, what analysis is moving. You do it from that point of view. And the other thing that I go on about, so half the room will probably be bored on this one, but I talk about useful, possible, and acceptable. And so that acceptability part was kind of what we were talking about earlier, about what's acceptable, where the boundaries, what does the legal agreement define as acceptable? Then there's what's actually technically possible. So once you know what's acceptable, well, what are your options? And does it actually provide any utility to the researchers? And so it's for me, it's a pull on those three. There's an acceptability part of that. There's also what's technically possible. And also then, you might have something acceptable and completely possible, but it's completely useless for a researcher because you've now made it too hard or too expensive or for that research to occur.
Thank you. Other comments? Oops.
Just a question or query on the deliverables of the working group. So there are some articulated in the page that's there. So say, are those proposed deliverables that would be kind of further established by the subgroups? Say because there's some how we might evolve some of those. And I noticed there wasn't one for the interoperability group as well, and whether that's or not that I could see in the reading of the documentation there.
One for the interoperability one as well. So we have one output basically. So it's all recommendations. So RDA doesn't produce standards. There's non-binding documents, but we want to come up with templates, blueprints, recommendations. To which level of detail? We won't have a consistent level of detail across all of these. I mean, this is not a research project that produces that kind of action, but we hope that it will be at a level that it's useful for either new theories being set up, two theories talking about potentially establishing a federation, so that it's clear to discuss what kind of federation are we actually aiming at, the layers that are here there. And it's also about, basically all that we can do is integrate the information that is coming from a range of different projects that the people are working on. This is not a project in its own right, so we're not developing anything new, but bringing together, getting comments from other communities is this viable, is this understandable in the first place? Because that's sometimes the biggest stumbling block. And that's what we hope to build. So we will put up templates for each of those deliverable documents that will be working documents where we just throw in stuff and then cleanse up as we progress. But I guess the first part really is information collection. So if you have, or working within whatever a TRE and are willing to share the architecture or sharing the process blueprints or some descriptions of the processes that you have. Go to that document, leave your contact details, because I mean, it doesn't make any sense that we send out an email, say we're going to organize whatever, a webinar or an online discussion forum discussing architecture. We would like to do this in a more structured form where we have the contact details, and then, you know, can we share some slides on the architectures? Then we try to integrate them, digest them, and send them out for comments again, and then have a discussion meeting online in different time zones, so we accommodate that. Also, if anybody wants to coordinate locally a region, because there's quite a lot of activity and coordination already happening within the UK, for example. If there is something similar to happen here in Australia, in the US, the Americas, Canada, that would be very helpful. In Europe, there are some European Union projects now in this TRE environment that are producing a lot of outcomes. So we're trying to kind of amalgamate that and share it with the larger community, using the resources from those initiatives ultimately. So that's what we're trying to get to do. So whatever, if you have a TRE and are willing to share stories, risk profiles, threat models, your architecture, your controls that you put in place, your processes that you have for access requests, or the case that you described, you know, different legal agreements and how do you implement them, that would be extremely helpful to collect, and I guess also extremely useful for the audience. Any other contributions? Which other TREs do we have in the room? Anybody willing to share briefly which TRE they're working with, or what kind of data, or what kind of processes, controls, anything? Nobody wishing to market their TRE. That's rare. That's rare. Yes.
Just a comment. I'm the asset manager of a biobank with information from autistic people. And we are looking to have our data, or we have our data in different places, but the idea is to use a TRE where it can be centralized and people can access the data that we approve based on a series of conditions that we have in material transfer agreement. When we collected that data, there was, if this application, participants decided what will be shared or not for future research. So in our case, maybe that's what we want, to be able to people go there. At the moment, we transfer the data to them, which is what we want to stop. So maybe they can be made cheaper if you leave all the legal thing to the people who put the data there, and the TRE just to allow the amount of space that is required to have different data and tools that people can go there and apply to the data and get an output. So maybe a TRE, if it has many clients, the cost will go down, and all those risks and responsibilities are left to the owner or custodian of the data.
In principle, and I guess there are TREs that host a variety of data for different types of institutions. I guess a complete separation of the legal liability and the technical operations is hard to guarantee, because as we discussed before, the legal requirements influence the processes and the steps that you need to implement. So depending on what the legal requirement is, or the agreement is on the use case, it will imply different controls that you will have in the processing pipeline. So these two worlds cannot be completely separated usually. I'm not sure how far they can be abstracted to whatever 3 standard models. And if there are 3 standard models that we can, or 5 or whichever, then of course it would make the implementation, the deployment, or the utilization of an existing TRE for a new community much easier. And this is what we hope to achieve also by this, because if you say, okay, this TRE has those architectural components, it has those standard processes and controls in place, this is sufficient to meet our risk profile, and so we can basically discuss having that TRE host our data or serve our community, then that, I guess, would be already a beneficial, a big success for the for the working group, if we can prepare the basis for such decision making, for example. And I think TREs would also be open to that because, yeah, it scales better if you serve a larger group of customers, yeah. Agree.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Ulrika Vihvali from CSC in Finland. So in terms of, got a chance to do a little bit of promo. So I'm involved in the EOSC Entrust project, which maybe some of you have heard of. And obviously CSC is also provides the SD desktop, which is our services, our TRE service. But it's only for those involved in Finnish research projects. So maybe not the right place to pitch it. But if you are in a Finnish research organization, then come and talk to me. Maybe there's someone here. But I want to make everyone here aware that one of the things that EOSC Entrust has recently launched this year is an open TRE provider forum, which meets monthly, and that really aims to work as a knowledge exchange forum for all TRE service providers, and everyone is welcome to join, and we meet monthly. We are on European time, unfortunately, so it might be a little bit difficult for some of you to join. But if you are interested in this, then by all means come and talk to me so that we can get you on the mailing list. And we do news, we do presentations from different TRE service providers, and do a lot of this kind of knowledge exchange that I think, and information gathering and sharing that I think you are also hoping to do. So I'll also come and talk to you afterwards, because I think also we need to align and get you guys to come and talk to us so that we can come and talk to you too.
Absolutely. So that's the whole idea. So as I said, the RDA is not doing anything. I'm not doing anything by itself is making the wrong statement now, but it's facilitating, it's enabling, and bringing those initiatives together and making those initiatives known as well. So yes, if we could launch that monthly discussion forum via the working group and put the link up there or the announcements via that mailing list, I guess that would be already an extremely useful step forward. And yes, even if it is European-based, the discussion participation is global. So time zone might be a bit inconvenient, but that doesn't matter, because I'm sure there is a similar forum in other parts of the world, and we can bring those together. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much. Please, yes, let's put that there and announce it via the working group list. That's the one big step forward. So the one big difference that we have now is that the working group is approved. We have this online forum where we have a mailing list, where we have a workspace where we can put documents and where we can collect information and share it. Good. With that, I guess we are getting all good. Yeah.
Could we put these things on the forum? They're not on the forum right now.
The slides?
Yeah, and the links here.
Yes. Yeah. So the slide deck will be uploaded to the workspace. We just integrated some of the slides not 2 weeks before the plenary happened, as was requested in the mailing list, but basically 20 minutes before the session started. So much for, but at least that way we're living up to expectations. I guess nobody was expecting them to be up front that early. But we were trying to improve, but yeah, definitely, absolutely, the slides will be made available. And please put your details and information in, because then we know who to reach out to specifically. Of course, stuff will be sent out via the generic mailing list, but follow-ups might be more individually targeted, also because of time zone issues and so on. Good. Any other comments, questions? 3, 2, 1, gone. Thank you so much for being here.